My name is James and I'm Professor of Urological Surgery in Aberdeen, Scotland, Adjunct Secretary General in the EAU for Education, and I'm the coordinator, academic coordinator for Pioneer. Well, I think the world is changing in terms of evidence, in terms of guideline development, in terms of drivers for change in clinical practice. Traditionally, clinical practice guidelines are underpinned by randomized controlled trials, prospective studies, etc. But we have a problem in practice, certainly in surgery, in urology specifically, where we know that 90% of what is published every year, and we in the guidelines office in the EAU, of course, in the EAU, you see that we find that 90% of what is published is not fit for purpose to changing our recommendations. And this has been something that has occurred year after year in the EAU. And so it was time for us to do something different. So that was one. We need to fill a gap in terms of the evidence that underpins our recommendations. But clearly, not only in filling the gap, the other issues we face is that for the good quality evidence that is published every year, in randomized studies, you find that there are some populations that are not, what I would say, they're not often included or not at all. For example, the elderly. For example, patients who have multiple comorbidities or on multiple drug therapies, or the obese. There are a huge number of patients that are not part of traditional randomized controlled trials. Well, then what do? We then take the results of randomized trials that were performed on a small subset of a population, and we apply it to everyone else. We have no evidence to suggest that the findings from randomized controlled trials from this subset can be generalizable across the rest of the population. And this is where real-world data really comes into its own. So it's not real-world data or randomized trials. It's about complementarity. And there's a huge space for real-world data to complement the evidence that we currently use to generate recommendations for practice. Well, I think of course for us, Pioneer was the first major step in terms of a professional medical society that steps into this world of real-world data analytics, where you have a major guideline development organization or body being at the forefront of it. So this for me is not only an excitement, but it's a way of us seeing the future in terms of the next generation of surgeons, where we must equip them not only to be good surgeons, but to be surgeons that understand traditional evidence, but also understand real-world data analytics and how it plays a role not only in their own clinical judgments, but also in informing patients, their families, and policymakers as to the impact for society, for certain interventions, on where we should invest or disinvest. And I think for me, this is the excitement. And we've got some really young, talented urologists from across Europe that are now actively involved in learning not only the traditional way of evidence synthesis, but learning the new way of real-world data analytics and how we may embrace it to actually improve patient care. So for me, this is hugely exciting.